She mopped hospital floors at 2 in the morning, came home before dawn, and sat before a wall of photographs of a boy she had not held in 11 years. He attended a private school outside Atlanta, lived in a house with a lawn, and every March 14th placed flowers on a grave, bearing the name of a woman he believed was his mother. Nadine Holloway had not slept through a night since 2014, not because of work, because sleep meant letting go. She did not call herself a victim. She called herself a mother still looking. The pediatric ward at Temple University Hospital was quiet at 2:15 in the morning, in the way that hospital wards are quiet, which is not silence, but the organized hum of machines keeping people alive. Nadine pushed the mop in long, even strokes down the corridor, the same corridor she had mopped 5 nights a week for the past 4 years. The floor was linoleum pale green, scuffed from years of gurney wheels and rubber-soled shoes. The fluorescent lights above gave everything the same flat brightness, regardless of the hour. 2 in the morning looked identical to 2 in the afternoon under these lights. Time did not pass here. It was managed. She had requested this ward. She could have worked the surgical floor, which paid a shift differential. She could have worked the administrative wing, which was easier. She asked for pediatrics, and the supervisor had looked at her for a moment longer than necessary and then approved the transfer without asking why. Nadine knew why. She did not explain it to anyone, because explaining it would have required saying out loud what she had never said out loud, which was that being near children was the only thing that made the nights bearable and the only thing that made them worse. She paused outside room 412. Through the glass panel in the door she could see a boy asleep in the bed. He was 5, maybe 6. An IV line ran from his left hand to a pole beside the bed. His mother was asleep in the chair next to him, her hand resting on the blanket near his knee, not holding his hand, just near it. The specific nearness of a parent who has learned to be close without disturbing the equipment. Nadine stood there for 3 seconds. She counted them the way she always counted them. 3 seconds was what she allowed herself. More than 3, and the weight of it would settle into her chest in a way that made it difficult to push the mop for the rest of the shift. She had learned this boundary the way you learn all boundaries that keep you functional. By crossing it once and paying for it, she moved on. Room 413. Room 414. The mop making its quiet rhythm on the linoleum. A nurse passed her in the hall and nodded, and Nadine nodded back, and neither of them spoke, because at 2 in the morning in a hospital there is an understanding that words cost more than they are worth. Her shift ended at 6. She changed in the locker room, folding her scrubs into the same locker she had used for 4 years, locker 17 bottom row. She put on her street clothes, a gray sweatshirt, jeans, sneakers with the left sole starting to separate at the toe. She took the bus, the 42 northbound. She sat in the same seat she always sat in, 3rd row window side, and she watched the city move past in the gray light of early morning. Philadelphia, waking up the way cities wake up, one window at a time. Her apartment was a studio on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Girard Avenue. 1 room, a bed, a small kitchen along the back wall, a bathroom with a shower that took 4 minutes to get warm. She did not turn on the overhead light when she came in. She did not need to. She knew the room the way her body knew the mop route. But she stopped the way she stopped every morning in front of the wall. The wall opposite the bed. A map of the United States pinned to it with red and blue thumbtacks marking cities. Sticky notes in her handwriting. Phone numbers. Names of police departments, social workers, legal aid offices, printed pages from websites, and in the center of it all a photograph. A boy 5 years old looking at the camera with a gap-toothed smile and eyes that took up half his face. The edges of the photograph had gone soft. Not torn, worn from being held. The face was beginning to blur at the edges where her thumb had rested against it too many times. She did not laminate it. She did not put it in a frame. She let it wear. The wearing was evidence that she had not stopped touching it, and she needed that evidence more than she needed the photograph to stay sharp. On the windowsill beside the bed, a clay pot. Lavender. She had kept lavender alive in this apartment for 11 years. Not because she liked it, because Elijah had liked it. When he was 3, he had grabbed a handful from a neighbor's garden and held it to his nose and laughed. And she had carried that specific laugh in her body the way some people carry scars. Invisible from the outside, structural on the inside. She watered the lavender. She made coffee. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall. Every Saturday morning at 8, there was a knock on her door. The same knock. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Miss Lorraine Jessup, 74 years old, 4'11", white-haired, and the kind of thin that comes from decades of eating last and worrying first. She lived in apartment 214 directly below Nadine. She brought cornbread wrapped in foil every Saturday. She brought coffee she had already made because she said Nadine's coffee tasted like punishment. Miss Lorraine had been a social worker for the city of Philadelphia for 31 years before she retired. She had spent 3 decades inside the system that Nadine had spent 11 years beating against from the outside. She knew its machinery. She knew its failures. She knew the specific shape of the gap between what the law promised and what it delivered, because she had watched families fall through that gap for most of her professional life. She did not say things like, "Stay strong" or "Keep the faith." She said things like, "Who are we calling today?" She said things like, "Did you follow up with the office in Fulton County?" She said things like, "I pulled the updated guidelines from the Department of Justice website, and there is a new provision we have not tried." She sat at Nadine's small table with her cornbread and her coffee, and she said on this particular Saturday morning in October, 200,000. Nadine looked at her. "Every year," Miss Lorraine said, "more than 200,000 children are taken by a parent in this country every year. That is the number. The Department of Justice published it, and then the world kept moving as if it had not." She broke off a piece of cornbread. She chewed it slowly. Parental abduction is the crime the world does not call a crime until it has already taken everything. Nadine said nothing. She held her coffee with both hands and looked at the photograph on the wall, the one with the blurring edges and the gap-toothed smile, and she thought about the number 200,000, and she thought about the fact that her son was one of them, and that most people who heard that number would nod and feel something for a moment, and then return to whatever they had been doing before they heard it. She finished her coffee. She picked up the phone. In a house in Brookhaven, a suburb north of Atlanta, where the lawns were edged with precision and the mailboxes stood in a line like soldiers, Elijah Price sat at a breakfast table and did not eat. The kitchen was large. Granite counters, stainless steel appliances, a window above the sink that looked out onto a backyard with a fence and a magnolia tree. Corinne was at the stove making eggs. Darnell sat at the head of the table, reading something on his phone. The morning moved around Elijah in its organized way. Coffee poured, plates set, orange juice in a glass that Corinne placed in front of him, with a small smile that he returned with a smaller one. He sat at the far end of the table. He did not touch his plate until Darnell picked up his fork. This was not a rule anyone had spoken out loud. It was a rule Elijah's body had learned the way bodies learn things in houses where the atmosphere depends on one person's mood. You wait, you read, you calibrate, then you act. He had been doing this so long he did not know he was doing it. Darnell looked up from his phone. "You have practice today." "Yes, sir." "What time?" 3:30. Darnell nodded. He went back to his phone. Elijah ate his eggs. Corinne sat down with her own plate and asked him about a history test, and he answered with the specific politeness of a child who has been trained to give complete answers without volunteering extra information. He was not rude. He was not cold. He was careful. And being careful at 16 looked so much like being well raised that no one had ever thought to look beneath it. At school he was quiet. He had friends, in the way that quiet people have friends, but a few around the edges, none of whom knew him past a certain depth, because he had never let anyone past that depth. His art teacher, a woman named Mrs. Okafor, had noticed him years ago. He drew constantly, charcoal mostly, and he drew the same thing over and over with small variations. Faces, women's faces. Not copied from photographs or screens, drawn from something internal. Mrs. Okafor had asked him once in 9th grade who the woman in his drawings was. He had looked at the page for a moment and said, "I do not know. I just draw faces." He said it without sadness. He said it the way you say a fact you have never examined, because examining it would require tools you do not have. She had not asked again, but she had kept every drawing he had given her for class. She had a folder of them in her desk, 17 faces, all slightly different, all clearly the same person. Every year, on the 14th of March, Darnell drove Elijah to a cemetery on the south side of Atlanta. They parked in the same spot. They walked the same path between the rows. They stopped at a headstone that read Nadine Price, and a date and nothing else. No photograph. No epitaph. No flowers except the ones they brought. The grass around it grew the same as the grass around every other stone. There was no evidence that anyone besides the two of them had ever stood here. Elijah placed the flowers. He stood for a minute. He did not cry. He had not cried here since he was 8. He stood, and he looked at the name, and he felt something that he could not describe because he had no memory attached to it, only the absence of memory, which is its own kind of feeling. A shape where something used to be. Darnell stood beside him. He put his hand on Elijah's shoulder. He said, "She loved you." He said this every year, the same words, the same tone. And every year, Elijah nodded, because what else do you do when your father tells you your dead mother loved you? You nod. You accept the shape of the story you were given. You do not ask why there are no other relatives who visit. You do not ask why there are no photographs of her in the house. You do not ask because the answers have always been the same. It was too painful. I put them away for your sake. Some things are better left in the past. At night in his bed in the dark, Elijah hummed. A melody. Slow. Simple. He had done this for as long as he could remember. He did not know its name. He did not know where it came from. It lived in his body the way the lavender lived on Nadine's windowsill, without explanation, without origin, just there. Corinne had heard it once passing his room. She had stopped in the hallway and listened. The next morning she asked him what the song was. He said, "I do not know, it just lives in my head." She had looked at him for a moment longer than usual, and then said nothing. She did not ask Darnell about it. She did not know why she did not ask Darnell. But something about the melody, something about the way it sounded, coming through a closed door at 11 at night, from a boy who did not sing any other time, told her that this was not a question that would be welcomed. She was right. She did not know yet how right she was. That particular Saturday morning in October, the one where Miss Lorraine sat in Nadine's kitchen with cornbread, and the number 200,000, was also March 14th. Not actually, not on the calendar, but for Nadine, every day contained March 14th, the way every day contained breathing. It was not something she chose to carry. It was something she could not put down. Miss Lorraine knew this. She knew that on certain mornings, Nadine needed to say it out loud. Not because saying it changed anything, because the alternative to saying it was carrying it in silence, and silence, after 11 years, had a weight that even Nadine's body could not manage alone. So Nadine told the story. She told it the way she told it every time, not from the beginning, from the part that still burned. "I met him at Greater Hope Baptist when I was 21, she said. He held the door open for me. He remembered my name the second time. He asked me to coffee, and he called the next day exactly when he said he would. He was the first man I had ever known who did what he said he was going to do." She paused. She looked at the coffee in her hands. "I thought that was love. I did not know it was a system." She told Miss Lorraine about the courtship. 2 years, clean, attentive. He met her mother. He came to Sunday dinner. He fixed the screen door on her mother's porch without being asked. Everyone said she was lucky. Everyone said Darnell Price was one of the good ones. They married when she was 23. Elijah came a year later, and for the first year, The architecture of the life he had built around her looked like shelter. It felt like care. First it was the bank account, she said. He said it made more sense to consolidate. He said he would manage the bills because he was better with numbers. I agreed because it seemed practical. Then it was the phone. He said our plan was too expensive. He put me on his account. The phone was in his name. Then it was the friends. Not all at once. One by one. He would say things after I came home from seeing someone. Not angry things. Quiet things. Concerned things. I just think she is a bad influence. I noticed you seem upset after you see her. Until it was easier to stop seeing people than to have the conversation afterward. Then it was the car. He sold it. He said, we only needed one. He said he would drive me wherever I needed to go, which meant he would know everywhere I went. Then it was the door. Miss Lorraine did not interrupt. She had heard this progression before, not from Nadine, from hundreds of women in her 31 years as a social worker. The sequence was almost always the same. The tools of control varied. The architecture did not. Darnell never hit her. She said this clearly because it was the fact that had undone everything. He never raised his hand. He never raised his voice. He controlled her with patience and consistency, and the specific cruelty of a man who understood that the most effective cage is one the person inside it helped build. He checked her phone. He monitored her spending. He decided what she wore not by telling her what to wear, but by commenting on everything she chose until her choices aligned with his preferences without him having to ask. He isolated her from her mother by being endlessly, exhaustingly helpful whenever her mother visited, until her mother said, "He is such a good man, Nadine. I do not know what you are complaining about." She had tried to explain it once to a counselor at the church. The counselor had asked, "Does he hit you?" She said no. The counselor had said, "Then I think what you are describing is a communication issue." She had tried to explain it to a judge 3 years later, when she filed for divorce. The judge had asked a specific question: "Has he ever physically harmed you?" She said no. The judge had nodded as if that settled it. Coercive control. That was the term she would learn later, years after it mattered, from Miss Lorraine, who had spent her career watching it and naming it and trying to make systems recognize it. Control without bruises. Domination without evidence. The kind of abuse that leaves no mark the court knows how to read. She had no money. She had no car. She had no phone. She had Elijah. And then she did not. Miss Lorraine set down her coffee cup. She had heard this part before. She listened again because listening again was what Nadine needed, and because Miss Lorraine understood that some stories do not get lighter with repetition. They get clearer. Nadine told her about the day. When Elijah was 5, Nadine filed for divorce through a legal aid organization that provided free representation to women in abusive marriages. Her lawyer was a young woman 2 years out of law school, competent, overwhelmed, carrying 47 cases at the time. Darnell did not shout. He did not threaten. He retained the most expensive family law attorney in their county. He filed a counterpetition for sole custody on the grounds that Nadine was psychologically unstable. He submitted affidavits from 4 witnesses: his best friend, his business partner, the pastor of their church, and Nadine's own mother, who signed a statement saying she had concerns about Nadine's mental health. Nadine's lawyer objected. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation. Nadine passed it. Darnell's lawyer requested a second one from an independent evaluator. The independent evaluator found no evidence of instability. Darnell's lawyer filed a motion for temporary custody. While the case proceeded, the judge granted it. "Temporary," Nadine said, looking at the wall. "That is what they called it. Temporary custody, pending investigation. As if temporary meant anything when your child is on the other side of it." Darnell picked up Elijah on a Tuesday. Nadine stood in the hallway of the courthouse while it happened. Elijah was holding a red backpack. He was wearing sneakers with dinosaurs on them. He looked back at Nadine and reached out his hand, not dramatically the way children reach, with full trust that the reaching would be met. Darnell carried him toward the elevator. The court-appointed officer stood between Nadine and the hallway, not blocking her. Present, a body in the space between a mother and her son that said without words that this was now the distance the law required. Her feet did not move. Not because she chose stillness, because something between her brain and her legs had stopped working. She stood in that hallway until it was empty. She stood there until a clerk came out of a side office and asked if she needed help. And she said no. And she walked to the bus stop and sat and waited for a bus she did not get on. Darnell changed his phone number within the week. He moved. He did not file a change of address with the court. His lawyer sent a letter to Nadine's lawyer, stating that his client had exercised his legal right to relocate. When Nadine called the police, the officer said, "Ma'am, he has legal custody. There is nothing we can do." When she called the county office, they said, "This is a custody matter, not a criminal matter." When she called the FBI, they said, "Ma'am, this is a civil dispute." Everyone told her the same thing in different words. He has the right, you do not. She called the legal aid office. Her lawyer had left the organization. Her case had been reassigned. The new lawyer had 53 cases. He said he would look into it. He did not call back for 6 weeks. By then Darnell and Elijah had disappeared into a country of 330 million people with a court order in his pocket and a head start that grew larger every day. She did not accept this. She simply ran out of people to call that day. She called more people the next day, and the day after that, and every day for 11 years. Miss Lorraine reached across the table. She put her hand on Nadine's wrist. She did not say it would be okay. She did not say God had a plan. She said, "Who are we calling today?" Nadine looked at the wall. She looked at the photograph with the blurring edges. She picked up the phone. In Atlanta, in a house with a mowed lawn and a mailbox with 2 names on it, Darnell Price had built a version of the truth that required daily maintenance. He had not planned it as a permanent structure. He had planned it as a bridge. A temporary explanation for a 5-year-old boy who cried at night and asked where his mother was and needed an answer that would make the crying stop. That was how Darnell would have described it if anyone had asked, which no one did, because no one knew there was a question to ask. He sat on the edge of Elijah's bed on a Tuesday night 3 weeks after they arrived in Atlanta. Elijah was in pajamas with rockets on them. His eyes were swollen. He had been crying on and off for days the way 5-year-olds cry in waves that come and go without warning and that cannot be reasoned with because the child does not yet have the architecture for reason. Darnell said Mommy went to heaven. He said it simply. He did not elaborate. He did not describe an accident or an illness or a specific event. He said those 4 words and he waited. Elijah looked at him. He asked, "When is she coming back?" Darnell said, "She is not coming back." "But she loves you from heaven," Elijah cried. Darnell held him. The crying lasted 11 minutes. Darnell counted. He counted because counting gave him something to do with his mind while his hands held his son and his conscience held something he had not yet learned to name. Elijah stopped crying. He fell asleep. He asked again 2 weeks later, and again a month after that. Each time, the question was slightly different and slightly smaller. Is Mommy still in heaven? Does Mommy see me? Did it hurt when she went? Each time Darnell answered with the same careful brevity. Yes, yes, no. She did not feel any pain. The questions stopped eventually. They always do. Children stop asking not because they stop wondering, but because they learn that some questions do not produce new answers. They learn to carry the shape of the missing thing without examining it. Elijah was 5. He learned. Over the following months, Darnell built the rest of the story, the way a man builds a wall, 1 brick at a time. He told Elijah it was a car accident. Quick, she was driving at night. There was nothing anyone could have done. He chose March 14th as the date, not because anything had happened on March 14th, but because he needed a day, and that was the day he filled out the paperwork. He bought a burial plot at Hillcrest Memorial on the south side of Atlanta. He paid for a headstone. He had them engrave Nadine Price and the date and nothing else. No photograph, no verse, no epitaph. Just a name and a number on a piece of granite in a row of other pieces of granite. It looked like every other grave. That was the point. Every year, on March 14th, he drove Elijah to Hillcrest. They brought flowers. They stood. They were quiet. Darnell put his hand on Elijah's shoulder and said, "She loved you." And Elijah nodded, and they drove home. The ritual was maintained with the same discipline Darnell applied to everything. It was part of the maintenance. The wall needed tending. 2 years after arriving in Atlanta, he met Corinne at a real estate networking event. She was 31, smart, self-possessed, building her career. He told her his first wife had died in a car accident. She said she was sorry. He said it was a long time ago. She believed him because there was no reason not to. He was a man with a son and a business and a story that was sad, but not unusual. People die in car accidents. Husbands raise children alone. The world was full of these stories, and they were all true, and his was not, and it fit perfectly among them. Corinne married Darnell when Elijah was 8. She loved the boy. She tried to be close to him. She cooked his favorite meals. She went to his school events. She asked about his friends. And she felt always a distance she could not measure. Not hostility. Not rejection. Something more precise. A boundary that Elijah maintained without knowing he was maintaining it. The way you maintain a wall you were born behind, and have never seen from the other side. She did not push. She thought it was grief. She thought it was the normal reserve of a child who had lost his mother young. She was partly right. She was entirely wrong. In Darnell's home office, in the bottom drawer of his desk, there was a metal box with a combination lock. Elijah had seen it once when he was 9. He had asked what was in it. Darnell had said, "Work papers." He said it the way he said most things, calmly, completely, without a crack. Inside the box there were 3 things: a copy of the temporary custody order from a courthouse in Philadelphia, which had never been made permanent because Darnell had never gone back to court; a printed log of 47 missed calls from a number that belonged to Nadine spanning the first 2 years, calls he had received on a phone he kept in a drawer and checked once a week to confirm she was still trying, and a sealed envelope from a legal aid attorney in Philadelphia, addressed to Darnell, postmarked 6 years ago. He had never opened it. He had kept it because throwing it away felt like evidence of something, and keeping it sealed felt like the absence of evidence. As long as he did not open it, he did not know what it said. And not knowing was a kind of protection that worked better than any lock. The box sat in the drawer. The drawer sat in the desk. The desk sat in the office of a house where a boy grew up believing his mother was buried in a cemetery he visited once a year with flowers and silence, and a father's hand on his shoulder. The wall held. For 11 years, the wall held. On the other side of it, Nadine had not stopped. Year 1, she called every police department within 500 miles of Philadelphia. She sat on the floor of her apartment with a map and a phone, and a list she had written in a spiral notebook. She worked through it alphabetically. She called Allentown. She called Baltimore. She called Charlotte. She called every city she could think of where a man with a construction business might relocate. No one had a record. No one could help. Most were polite. Some were not. Year 2, she took a second job. Weekends at a laundromat on Broad Street. The money went into an envelope she kept separate from her living expenses. She labeled it with one word: find. Year 3, she hired a private investigator. A man named Terrence, who worked out of an office on Market Street and charged $400 up front and $200 a month. Terrence was competent and thorough, and after 5 months, he found a utility record for a Darnell Price in Cobb County, Georgia. Then, the trail went cold. Darnell had moved again. Terrence kept looking. The money ran out. Nadine picked up a 3rd shift. Year 5, she contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She sat in a gray office in Washington, D.C. on a Wednesday afternoon and filled out paperwork. She gave them the only photograph she had, Elijah at 5. The one with the blurring edges. They scanned it. They entered it into a federal database alongside thousands of other photographs of children whose faces would age while the system tried to find them. Year 7, the case was assigned to a specialist, a woman named Dr. Pauline who worked with age progression technology. She took the photograph of Elijah at 5, and she used software to project what he might look like at 10, at 12, at 14. She sent Nadine the images. Nadine sat at her kitchen table in Philadelphia and looked at a computer-generated photograph of her son at 14 years old. She looked at it for 1 hour, not because she was studying it, because it was the first time in 9 years that she had seen her son grow up. It did not matter that the image was created by an algorithm. It did not matter that the jawline might be wrong or the ears slightly off. It was the closest thing she had to watching him become a person. She held the printout with both hands the way she held his photograph. The edges would wear down too eventually. That was the price of holding something. Year 9. Miss Lorraine connected her with a nonprofit called Searching Parents Alliance, an organization that worked specifically with cases of parental abduction. They had lawyers, they had investigators, they had a media team that created awareness campaigns. They took Nadine's case. They told her they could not promise anything. She said she was not looking for promises. She was looking for her son. Year 11, the campaign launched. A poster, simple. 3 photographs arranged in a row. On the left, Nadine. In the center, Elijah, at 5, the original, the one she had touched so many times the edges had softened to cloth. On the right, the age progression at 16, the face the algorithm had built from the bones of a 5-year-old smile. Below the photographs, a single line. Have you seen this child separated from his mother since 2014? If you have any information, contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The posters were printed in batches. They were sent to community centers, libraries, churches, bus stations. They went to Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Charlotte, Nashville. And because a volunteer at the distribution center had once lived in Georgia and still had contacts there, Atlanta, the poster arrived in Atlanta on a Tuesday in October. It was pinned to a community board at the Decatur Public Library by a volunteer who did not know that the boy in the age progression photograph was sitting in a classroom 4 miles away. 2 weeks before the poster arrived, Elijah sat in Mrs. Okafor's art class on a Thursday afternoon. The assignment was a portrait from memory, not a copy from a photograph, not a still life. A face you carried, someone you remembered. Most students drew grandparents. One drew a dog. Elijah picked up his charcoal and he drew what he always drew, a woman's face. He started with the eyes because the eyes were the part he was most certain of. Dark, slightly wide-set. Looking directly at whoever was looking back. He drew the outline of the jaw, the forehead, the space between the eyebrows. He could not get the nose right. He never could. It was as if his memory held the face in pieces that did not quite connect. A puzzle with most of the border completed, but the center still missing. A boy next to him leaned over. "Who is that?" "I do not know," Elijah said. "I just draw faces." It was the same answer he had given for years. It had always been enough. It was beginning to not be enough. He went home that afternoon and sat in his room and thought about things he had not thought about before. Not because something new had happened, because something old had accumulated. The melody he hummed at night. He had hummed it since he could remember. It did not come from a song on the radio, or a movie, or a video. It came from somewhere beneath those things, somewhere before them. It lived in his body, the way the smell of lavender lived in his body. A scent he recognized whenever he passed a garden or a candle shop, but that did not exist in his own house. There was no lavender in Darnell's house. There never had been. And yet, Elijah's body responded to it. Every time a small pull behind his ribs, a micro-pause in his breathing, a turning toward the source. He remembered a warmth on his forehead, not a general warmth, a specific one, the size and pressure of lips. Someone kissing his forehead before sleep. He could not see who. He could only feel the warmth, and beneath it, somewhere impossibly faint, the smell of lavender. He asked Darnell one question. One evening in the kitchen, while Corinne was out showing a property, Elijah was at the counter doing homework. Darnell was at the stove heating soup. "Did Mom have a song she used to sing to me?" Darnell did not turn around. He stood at the stove with his hand on the spoon. Elijah counted the seconds of silence. 1, 2, 3. He counted them automatically, the way he counted all of Darnell's silences, because in this house, silence had texture. It had weight, and the weight of a silence told you what the words after it were worth. "I do not remember," Darnell said. "It was a long time ago." He turned around, and he was smiling, and the soup was ready, and the moment passed in the way. Moments pass in controlled environments, smoothly, without a mark, as if it had never happened. Elijah said nothing else. He ate his soup. He did his homework. He went to bed. But he lay in the dark that night, and he hummed the melody, and he thought about 3 seconds. 3 seconds of silence before an answer about a song. 3 seconds was not a long time. 3 seconds was a very long time if the question was simple and the answer was true. He opened his sketchbook. He drew the face again. This time he added the mouth. He had never drawn the mouth before. He did not know why he could draw it now, but his hand moved, and the charcoal gave him a shape that was unmistakable. She was smiling. The Decatur Public Library was a flat brick building on Sycamore Street, with a parking lot on one side and a community garden on the other. Elijah's class went there on a Wednesday for a research project on local history. 23 students, a teacher, a bus. The kind of field trip that fills a day and produces a 2-page paper and is forgotten by Friday. Elijah stood in the main hallway, waiting for the librarian to assign them to tables. The hallway was wide and bright, with that particular institutional lighting that makes everything look equally important and equally uninteresting. There was a bulletin board on the wall to his left. He looked at it because there was nothing else to look at, and because the librarian was still talking to his teacher, and the line was not moving. The board was full. A flyer for a weekend yoga class, a business card for a handyman, a notice about a neighborhood fall festival, a printed sheet about a tutoring program at the community college, layers of paper pinned on top of other paper, the accumulated announcements of a community talking to itself. In the lower right corner, partially covered by the edge of the yoga flyer, there was a poster. He almost did not see it. The corner of it was visible, just a sliver of white paper with a photograph on it. He moved the yoga flyer aside with one finger to see the rest. 3 photographs in a row. On the left, a woman. She looked to be in her mid-30s. Dark hair, dark eyes. She was not smiling. She was looking at the camera with an expression that was not sadness, but was related to sadness. Something quieter. Something that had been carried a long time and had become a permanent feature of the face, the way weather becomes a permanent feature of a building. In the center, a child, a boy, 5 years old maybe, gap-toothed smile, eyes that took up half his face. Elijah looked at the child and felt nothing specific, just a kid. On the right, a face generated by a computer, a projection. 16 years old, male, and Elijah stopped. The face on the right looked like the face he saw in the mirror every morning, not similar. Not in the way that strangers sometimes look like other strangers. The same shape of the jaw, the same set of the eyebrows, the same slight tilt of the eyes that he had always thought was just his own face, being his own face, but was now his own face on a poster, on a bulletin board in a library he had never been to before. He looked at the child in the center. He looked at the face on the right. He looked back at the child, the same person. At 5, at 16. At 5, at 16. He looked at the woman on the left, and everything in his body went quiet. The hallway noise, the students behind him, the librarian's voice, all of it receded the way sound recedes when you go underwater. The woman's face. He knew that face. Not from a photograph, not from a screen, from charcoal on paper, from the sketchbook in his backpack, from 11 years of drawing and redrawing a face he could not name. The eyes. The wide-set eyes looking directly at whoever was looking back. The jawline he could never get quite right because his hand had been working from a memory that was 11 years old and fading. The mouth he had drawn for the first time 2 weeks ago. Smiling. He read the text below the photographs. He read it slowly, one word at a time. The way you read things that are changing the shape of your life. Nadine Holloway, mother, searching for her son, Elijah, since 2014. Last known location, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. If you have any information, please contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. He read his name. Elijah. He read the year. 2014. He was 5 years old in 2014. He read the word mother. He read the word searching. Searching. Present tense. Active. Not deceased. Not late. Not buried. In Hillcrest Memorial under a headstone with a name and a date and no photograph. Searching. Still. Now. Today. A woman on a poster in a library in a city 4 miles from his school searching. His teacher called out that the tables were ready. Students moved past him. Someone bumped his shoulder. He did not move. He stood in front of the poster, and he looked at the woman's face, and he understood in a way that did not require thought, that bypassed his brain entirely and arrived in his chest, that the face he had been drawing for 11 years was not a ghost. It was not a dream. It was not something invented by a child's imagination to fill a space that grief had made. It was his mother. And she was alive. He reached for his phone. His hand was shaking. He held the phone up to the poster and pressed the button. The image was blurred. He pressed it again. Blurred again. His hands would not hold still. He braced the phone against his thigh, steadied it, pressed a third time. The image came through clear. He put the phone in his pocket. He stood for 4 more seconds in front of the poster. He looked at her face 1 more time. Then he walked into the library and sat at the table his teacher had assigned him and opened a book about local history and read nothing. The words were shapes on a page. His mind was somewhere else. His mind was in his pocket with a photograph of a woman who was supposed to be dead and was not. He did not go back to class. He told his teacher he felt sick, and he sat on a bench outside the library and looked at the photograph on his phone for 40 minutes. He zoomed in on the woman's face. He zoomed in on the child. He zoomed in on the age progression. He looked at the text at the bottom until the words stopped being words and became shapes and then became words again. He opened his browser. He typed Nadine Holloway, Philadelphia. The results loaded. Most were nothing. A LinkedIn profile for a woman in another state. A Facebook page that had not been updated in years. Then, on the second page of results, a link to a local news site, the Philadelphia Independent. The article was 7 years old. The headline read, "Mother continues search for son taken by estranged husband." He tapped it. The page loaded slowly. There was a photograph of a woman standing in front of a building he did not recognize, holding a printed flyer. The article was short, 4 paragraphs. It named Nadine Holloway, age 30 at the time of publication. It named her son, Elijah. It named his age, 10 at the time. It named the year he was taken, 2014. It named the city, Philadelphia. It named the father, Darnell Price. Elijah read his father's name in a news article about a missing child, and the missing child was him. He read the article twice. He closed the browser. He put the phone in his pocket. He sat on the bench outside the Decatur Public Library, and he looked at the parking lot and the community garden and the sky above both, and he did not move for a long time. The bus came. He got on. He went home. Darnell was in the kitchen when he walked in. How was the library? Fine. Learn anything. Local history. Darnell nodded. Elijah went upstairs. He ate dinner that evening. He answered questions about his day. He cleared his plate and loaded the dishwasher and said good night to Corinne with the same small politeness he always used. He did not let anything show. He had been trained for this, though the training had not been intentional. 11 years in a house where the atmosphere was set by one person had taught him to manage his face the way a pilot manages instruments. Read the room. Adjust. Do not let the turbulence show on the surface. It was a survival skill he had learned without knowing he was learning it, and it was protecting him now in a way Darnell had never anticipated. He lay in bed until 2 in the morning. He counted the minutes the way he counted silences. When the house was completely still, when Darnell's breathing had settled into the deep rhythm he could hear through the wall, Elijah got up. He walked downstairs in bare feet, avoiding the third step because it creaked, which was something he had known since he was 7. Darnell's office. The door was not locked. Darnell did not lock internal doors, because locked doors in his own house would have suggested there was something worth hiding, and the architecture of his control depended on the appearance that there was nothing to hide. The desk. Bottom drawer. The metal box with the combination lock. Elijah had not thought about this box in years. He thought about it now. He tried Darnell's birthday. 0823. The lock did not open. He tried Corinne's birthday. 0517. It did not open. He sat on the floor of the office, and he thought about what numbers a man like his father would choose. Numbers that mattered. Numbers that anchored something. He tried 0314. March 14th. The day his mother supposedly died. The day that did not exist. The day his father had invented and maintained for 11 years with flowers and silence and a hand on his shoulder. The lock opened. Inside, there were 3 items. A document folded with a court seal at the top. He opened it. Temporary Custody Order, Court of Common Pleas, Philadelphia County. The word temporary was printed in the same size as every other word. It did not stand out. It should have. Temporary. 11 years of temporary. Beneath the document, 3 envelopes. 2 from the same law firm, the return address in Philadelphia. 1 from a different firm. All 3 were sealed. Unopened. The postmarks spanned 6 years. Someone had been writing to his father, and his father had kept the letters, the way you keep evidence you are afraid to destroy and unwilling to read. At the bottom of the box, beneath everything, a photograph. Small, wallet-sized. A woman sitting on a porch step with a boy in her lap. The boy was 3, maybe. He was holding her hand. She was smiling. Not for the camera. At him. The smile was directed downward at the top of his head, and it was the kind of smile that has no audience. The kind that happens because the feeling is too large to hold inside a face without some of it leaking out. He turned the photograph over. On the back in handwriting he did not recognize 5 words. My 2 loves, Mom and E. Summer, 2012. He sat on the floor of his father's office. He held the photograph. The woman on the porch step was the woman on the poster, was the woman in his sketchbook, was the face he had been drawing for 11 years without knowing her name. He knew it now. The face in the sketchbook had a name. 3 days passed. Elijah moved through them the way water moves through a crack in a wall, slowly, without being seen, changing the structure from the inside. He stopped eating dinner at the table. Not dramatically. He simply said he had homework, or he was not hungry, or he had eaten late after practice. Small excuses, the kind that do not register individually but accumulate. He spoke less. Not enough for Corinne to call it silence. Enough for Darnell to notice. Darnell noticed everything. That was his instrument. He read people the way other people read weather, by looking at what was moving, and in which direction, and how fast. He had built his life on the ability to detect shifts in other people before those people detected the shifts in themselves. He looked at Elijah across the breakfast table on a Thursday morning, and he said, "Is everything okay?" Elijah said yes. Darnell held the look for 2 seconds. 2 seconds was not long. 2 seconds was very long when the person holding it was looking for a crack. He did not find one. Elijah's face gave him nothing. It was the face of a boy who had been trained by the very environment Darnell had built, a face that could hold still under observation, that could answer questions without flinching, that could sit across from the man who had lied to him for 11 years, and eat eggs, and say good morning and mean none of it, and show none of that either. Darnell did not ask again, but he began to watch. Corinne noticed something different. One evening she walked past Elijah's closed door and heard him humming. She stopped. She stood in the hallway and listened. The melody was the same one he had always hummed, the slow, simple one that lived in his body without origin or name. But he was humming it louder now. Not much louder, just enough that it carried through the door. She mentioned it to Darnell that night. Where did Elijah learn that song? Darnell was reading on his phone. He did not look up. What song? The one he hums every night. He has done it since he was small. Darnell was still for 4 seconds. Corinne counted without knowing she was counting. People in Darnell's house counted his silences. It was a reflex, a survival adaptation shared by everyone who lived inside his radius. I do not know, he said. He looked up from his phone, and his face was composed, and his voice was even, and the 4 seconds that preceded both were the only thing that did not fit. Corinne said nothing else. She went to bed, but she lay there in the dark, and she thought about the song, and the 4 seconds, and the specific quality of the silence that had filled them, and she understood, in a way she could not yet name, that those 4 seconds contained something that did not belong to the version of the world she had been given. On a Monday morning, Elijah left the house 30 minutes before the school bus. He told Corinne he was meeting a friend to study. He walked to the public library on Claremont Road. He sat at a desk in the back corner. He took out his phone, and he looked at the photograph of the poster one more time. At the bottom, the phone number. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. He dialed. An automated voice answered. You have reached the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children hotline. If you are in immediate danger, press 1. For all other inquiries, press 2. He pressed 2. A hold tone played. He hung up. He sat for 1 minute. He dialed again. The same automated voice, the same options. He pressed 2. The hold tone began. He hung up. He sat for 3 minutes. He looked at the photograph on his phone. The woman, the child, the age progression. The word searching. He dialed a 3rd time. He pressed 2. The hold tone played. He did not hang up. A voice came on the line. A woman. Calm professional trained to speak to people who were calling the hardest phone number they had ever dialed. She said, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, this is Diane. How can I help you? Elijah said, I think I am the boy on the poster. The line was quiet for a moment. Diane said, Can you tell me your name? Elijah. Elijah Price. And where are you calling from, Elijah? Atlanta, Georgia. How old are you? 16. She asked more questions. His date of birth. His city of origin. The name on the poster. He gave each answer in the same flat voice he used at the dinner table, the same voice he used to say fine and yes sir and good night, the voice that held still under any weight because it had been built to. Diane said, Elijah, I am going to put you on a brief hold while I check our records. He waited. The hold music was soft, forgettable. He sat in the back corner of a public library and listened to it and understood that when the music stopped, his life would be different on the other side. The music stopped. Diane came back. Her voice had changed. Not dramatically, but the professional distance had compressed slightly, the way a voice compresses when the person behind it has just confirmed something that matters. She said, Elijah, we have a match in our system. I need to explain a few things to you about what happens next. In Philadelphia, at 2:17 in the afternoon, Nadine was mopping the hallway of the pediatric ward, room 412, room 413. The mop, the linoleum, the fluorescent light, the rhythm that had carried her through 4 years of nights in this corridor. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She did not hear it. Her hands were in gloves, and the vibration was faint, and the mop handle was thick, and she was moving. The call went to voicemail. 20 seconds later it vibrated again. She stopped. She pulled off her left glove with her teeth, and reached into her pocket, and looked at the screen. A Washington, D.C. area code. A number she did not recognize. She answered the way she answered all unknown calls, which was the same way she had answered them for 11 years, with a voice that was ordinary on the surface and braced beneath it. Hello, Mrs. Holloway, my name is Diane. I am calling from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I am assigned to your case. Nadine did not speak. She stood in the middle of the hallway, with the mop handle in her right hand and the phone in her left and the fluorescent lights humming above her, and she did not speak. 6 seconds passed. She counted them the way she counted everything. The way the whole world counted in this story. Seconds by seconds, silences by silences. The specific arithmetic of people whose lives depended on what came next. "Mrs. Holloway, are you there?" "I am here." Her voice did not change. Her hand changed. Her right hand tightened on the mop handle the way a person tightens on whatever is nearest when the ground shifts. Not because they choose to. Because the body decides before the mind catches up, Diane said. "We received a call this morning from a young man in Atlanta, Georgia. He is 16 years old. He identified himself as Elijah Price. He contacted us after seeing a poster from our awareness campaign at a public library. We have matched his information against the file you submitted. The match is consistent across all data points." Nadine heard every word. She processed none of them. They entered her body the way the melody of the lullaby had entered Elijah's body, not through understanding, but through a channel deeper than understanding, a channel that had been waiting for exactly this information for 4,015 days. She asked one question. "Is he safe?" "Yes, he is safe." Nadine Holloway sat down on the floor of the pediatric ward at Temple University Hospital. She did not choose to sit. Her legs chose for her, the way legs choose when they have been carrying something for 11 years, and the weight suddenly changes shape. She sat with her back against the wall, and the mop handle still in her right hand, and her phone pressed to her left ear, and her legs straight out in front of her on the linoleum she had mopped 10,000 times. A nurse came around the corner, saw her sitting on the floor, slowed. Nadine looked at her and shook her head, once a small shake that said, "This is not an emergency, and this is not something I can explain, and please keep walking." The nurse hesitated. Then she kept walking. Diane explained the process. Verification of identity, documentation review, a coordination call between the center, the local authorities, and both parties, a meeting supervised at a neutral location. Timeline 48 hours, minimum. Nadine said, "I have waited 11 years. I can wait 48 hours. She said it clearly, and she meant it, and her voice was steady, and none of that prevented her from staying on the floor of that hallway for 20 minutes after she hung up the phone. She sat there with the mop beside her, and the glove still off her left hand, and the fluorescent lights above her, and the quiet hum of the machines behind the closed doors, keeping other people's children alive. A doctor passed her. Then an orderly. Then another nurse. She did not move. She did not explain. She sat on the floor of a hospital she had cleaned for 4 years, and she held the phone in her hand like a compass point, the way the lavender sat on her windowsill, the way the photograph with the blurring edges sat on her wall like an object that said, "Something has changed. Something is beginning. Hold still." She held still. For 20 minutes she held still. Then she stood up. She pulled her glove back on. She picked up the mop. She finished her shift 2 days later, a Wednesday evening. Corinne was showing a property in Buckhead and would not be home until 9. Elijah knew this because he had checked her calendar on the refrigerator that morning. He had planned this the way his father planned things. Quietly, completely, without a crack. He sat at the kitchen table. Darnell was at the counter pouring a glass of water. The house was quiet the way it was always quiet, the specific silence of a home where noise required permission. Elijah placed the photograph on the table, face up. Nadine on the porch step. Elijah at 3 in her lap, her hand around his, the handwriting on the back invisible but present. He placed it in the center of the table, the way you place a card you have been holding for a long time. Darnell turned around with his water. He saw the photograph. He went still. Not the dramatic stillness of someone caught, the controlled stillness of someone calculating. His eyes moved from the photograph to Elijah to the photograph again. "Where did you get that?" Elijah said nothing. "You went through my office." Elijah said nothing. Darnell sat down across from him. He set the glass on the table. He looked at the photograph as if he could change what it showed by looking at it long enough. Elijah said, "She is not dead." Not a question, a statement. 4 words laid on the table beside the photograph, and the table was now holding more weight than it had been built to hold. Darnell's face moved through a sequence. Elijah watched it the way he had watched his father's face for 16 years, reading the shifts, measuring the pauses, waiting for the version that would come out on top. First, nothing. The blank composure. Then something behind the eyes that might have been fear, or might have been recognition that fear was now appropriate. Then the pivot. "I was protecting you," Darnell said. "Your mother was not well. She was not capable of taking care of you. I made a decision that I believed was right for you." He said this calmly. He said it the way he said everything. With structure, with conviction, with the specific persuasiveness of a man who has been telling himself the same story long enough that it has become indistinguishable from truth inside his own head. Elijah listened. He let Darnell finish. He had learned a long time ago that silence was the most powerful tool in this house. He had learned it from the man sitting across from him. "You told me she was dead," Elijah said. Darnell looked at the table. It was easier than the truth. Easier for who? The kitchen went quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall moved. Darnell did not answer. He did not answer because the answer was obvious, and the obvious answer was not the one he had spent 11 years telling himself. Elijah stood up. He pushed the chair back. He looked at his father across the table, and he saw what he imagined Nadine had seen all those years ago. Not a monster. Something more ordinary and more dangerous than a monster. A man who believed his own reasons. "I already called them," Elijah said. "The center. They know my name. They know where I am. They know she is alive. You cannot undo that." He left the kitchen. He went upstairs. He closed his bedroom door. He sat on his bed in the dark, and he hummed the melody, and this time the melody had a source, and the source had a name, and the name was Nadine, and she was alive, and she had been looking for him for 11 years while he placed flowers on an empty grave. Darnell sat alone at the kitchen table, the photograph between his hands, the glass of water untouched, the house around him exactly as it had been 5 minutes ago, and entirely different. He had spent 11 years maintaining a story that required him to believe it as deeply as his son did. The problem with building a world out of a lie is that you cannot leave it when it collapses. You are inside it when it falls. For the first time in 11 years, he did not have a plan for what came next. The verification took 48 hours. Elijah's identity was confirmed through records held by the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas. Nadine's identity was confirmed through the case file she had maintained with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for 6 years. A supervised meeting was arranged at the center's regional office in Atlanta. Friday afternoon, 2 o'clock. Nadine flew from Philadelphia on a Thursday evening. The ticket was purchased by Miss Lorraine Jessup, who had taken the money from a savings account she had kept for 31 years and had never spent because she had always said she was saving it for something important, and she had never found anything important enough until now. Nadine packed no bag. She carried 3 things: the photograph of Elijah at 5, with the edges worn soft from holding, a sprig of dried lavender cut from the pot on her windowsill, her identification. That was all. She did not bring clothes for a second day because she could not think past the first one. She could not think past 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon. The office was in a building on Peachtree Street. Gray carpet, fluorescent lights, a waiting room with plastic chairs and a water cooler, and a stack of brochures on a side table. Nadine sat in one of the plastic chairs. Her hands were on her thighs. Her back was straight. She did not move. She did not look at the clock. She did not check her phone. She had waited 11 years, and the 20 minutes remaining were not significant as a measure of time. But they were significant as a measure of the body. Her pulse was in her temples. Her breathing was shallow. Her hands, the hands that had mopped a hospital floor for 4 years and held a photograph until its edges blurred and watered a lavender plant every morning as an act of faith. Her hands were completely still. She had made them still. She needed them still. The door opened. A caseworker came through first. Behind her, a young man. Tall. Taller than Nadine by several inches. Broad shoulders. Dark hair. 16 years old, and carrying the posture of someone who has been careful for so long that carefulness has become the shape of his body. Nadine looked at him. The photograph on her wall was 11 years old, and the face in it was 5. This face was not that face. This face had a jaw and cheekbones, and the beginning of the person he was becoming. But the eyes were the same eyes she had last seen in a courthouse hallway, reaching toward her full of a trust that had not yet learned it could be broken. Those eyes were not reaching now. They were watching her with the same expression she had seen on her own face in the bathroom mirror for 11 years. Careful, Elijah looked at her. He saw the face from the poster. He saw the face from the sketchbook. He saw the eyes he had drawn over and over with charcoal on paper. The eyes he had gotten right every time, because they were the one part of her his memory had refused to release. She was real. She was three-dimensional. She was breathing. Neither of them moved. The caseworker stood near the door. The room was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed their flat institutional hum. The water cooler in the corner made a small bubbling sound. Ordinary noises in a room where something was happening that was not ordinary at all. Then Nadine did something she had not planned. She did not say his name. She did not say my baby or my son, or any of the words she had imagined saying for 11 years. She hummed, very quietly, almost inaudibly, a melody, slow and simple, the melody she had sung to him every night before bed, when he was 3, when he was 4, when he was 5, the melody she had not sung since the last night she put him to sleep, the night before the courthouse, the night before everything. Elijah heard it. The sound entered him through a door that had been unlocked his entire life waiting, the melody he hummed every night in the dark, the melody that lived in his body without origin, the melody Corinne had heard through his bedroom door, the melody Darnell had pretended not to recognize. It had a source. It had always had a source. The source was standing 6 meters away from him in a gray office on Peachtree Street, humming so quietly the caseworker could barely hear it. But Elijah could hear it the way you hear something that has been playing inside you for 11 years. "That song," he said. His voice broke on the second word, the way a surface breaks, when what is underneath it is finally too much to hold. "You are the song." She nodded. Her eyes did not leave his face. Her hands did not move from her sides. She stood there and she nodded, and everything she had carried for 4,015 days was in that nod. He walked toward her. He did not run. He walked. 1 step. The distance was 6 meters. Then 4. Then 2. Then none. She did not reach for him first. She waited. She had learned in 11 years of waiting that the most important arrivals are the ones the other person chooses. He had to choose to close the distance. He had to choose her the way she had chosen him every single day he had been gone. He chose. The center notified local law enforcement within 24 hours. A detective from the Fulton County District Attorney's Office reviewed the file. The custody order from Philadelphia was examined. It was temporary. It had never been finalized. Darnell had never returned to court. He had taken a temporary arrangement and stretched it across a decade, relying on distance and silence and the specific slowness of a system that was not built to pursue cases where the perpetrator and the parent were the same person. The detective spoke with the district attorney. The charge under consideration was custodial interference, a felony in the state of Georgia when it involves concealment of a child and deliberate deception of the other parent. More than 200,000 children in the United States are affected by parental abduction each year. Most cases are never prosecuted. Most are classified as civil disputes, not criminal ones. The line between a parent exercising custody and a parent committing abduction is a line the legal system has never drawn with confidence, and the people who suffer most from that ambiguity are the parents on the other side of it and the children caught between. Darnell hired a lawyer. The lawyer reviewed the file and told him what he already knew, which was that the temporary custody order did not authorize relocation across state lines without notification, and did not authorize telling a child his mother was dead, and did not authorize 11 years of concealment. The lawyer told him to cooperate. Darnell cooperated. Corinne learned the truth on a Friday evening, not from Darnell, From the caseworker who called to explain the situation, Corinne sat on the edge of her bed and listened and did not interrupt. When the caseworker finished, Corinne said thank you and hung up and sat in the silence of a house that had just become a different house. She did not cry because of Darnell. She cried because of Elijah, because she understood now what the distance had been. The careful politeness, the measured responses, the way he waited for Darnell to eat before he picked up his fork, it was not grief for a dead mother. It was the learned behavior of a child whose world had been built by someone who controlled it completely, and she had been inside that world for 8 years without seeing the walls. Nadine called her 2 days later. Through the caseworker, she said, "I know you loved my son. I am not angry at you. You did not know. And he told me that you were kind to him. That matters. It will always matter." Corinne could not speak for a moment. Then she said, "I should have asked more questions." Nadine said, "He built a world where questions were not welcome. That is not your fault. That is what he does." On a Tuesday evening, Darnell sat in his car outside his own house. The engine was off, the porch light was on, the lawn was mowed. The mailbox stood at the curb with 2 names on it that no longer described the people inside. Elijah was not inside. He was at a hotel with Nadine, arranged by the caseworker as a temporary measure, while the legal process unfolded. Darnell sat in the car, and he looked at the house he had built and maintained for 11 years, and he understood that the maintenance was over, not because the law had come, not because Corinne was packing a suitcase in the bedroom, because a 16-year-old boy had sat across from him at the kitchen table and asked a 3-word question he could not answer. Easier for who? He had told himself for 11 years that he was protecting his son. He had said it to himself so many times, and with such consistency that it had become a load-bearing wall inside his mind, and without it, the structure could not stand. He sat in the car, and he felt the structure not standing. He did not start the engine. He did not go inside. He sat in the driveway of a house with a mowed lawn in a suburb, where the mailboxes stood in a line, and he was alone with a kind of silence. He had spent 11 years making sure he never had to hear. The silence of a man who has run out of story. The hotel room had 2 beds. Nadine sat on the edge of one. Elijah sat in the chair by the window. The distance between them was 4 feet. It might as well have been 11 years. They did not talk about Darnell. They did not talk about the courthouse or the custody order or the cemetery with the empty grave. They talked about small things first, because small things are how you test the weight of a floor before you step fully onto it. She asked him what he liked to eat. He said he liked grilled cheese and tomato soup, which was something he had always liked and did not know he had learned from her, because she had made it for him every Sunday when he was 3. She did not tell him this. She filed it away in the place where she kept things that hurt in a way she was grateful for. He told her about school, about art class, about Mrs. Okafor. He said he was good at drawing. She said she knew. He looked at her. She said, "I knew because you used to draw on everything. The walls, the floor, the back of the couch. I could not keep a clean surface in the house." He almost smiled. Almost. The muscles moved. The expression did not quite arrive. But it was closer than anything she had seen on his face since he walked through the door of the center. He opened his backpack. He took out the sketchbook. He held it for a moment, and then he handed it to her without explanation. She took it. She opened it to the first page. A face. Charcoal on paper. A woman. Eyes drawn with certainty. The rest sketched with the hesitation of someone working from a signal that was fading. She turned the page. Another face. The same woman. Slightly different. The jawline more defined. The hair longer. She turned again and again. 17 faces. All the same person. All slightly different. All unmistakably her. She did not say anything. She turned the pages slowly, one at a time, and Elijah watched her turn them, and he understood what she was seeing. She was seeing that he had remembered her, not with his mind, with his hands. His hands had held on to something his memory had been told to release, and they had refused, and they had drawn her back into existence one page at a time for 11 years. She reached the last drawing, the one with the mouth, the smile. She looked at it for a long time. Then she closed the book and held it against her chest, and she looked at her son, and she did not cry, because she had spent 11 years learning to hold things without breaking. He said, "Why could you not find me sooner?" The question was not an accusation. But it was not nothing either. It had an edge. The way a child's question has an edge, when the child has been carrying it long enough for it to sharpen. She told him. She told him about the calls. She told him about the police departments, the lawyers, the FBI. She told him about the legal aid attorney who was carrying 47 other cases. She told him about the system that classified his disappearance as a civil dispute and moved on. She did not soften it. She did not apologize for it. She said, "The system was not built to find you. I found you anyway. It just took longer than any mother should ever have to wait." He was quiet. He looked out the window at Atlanta, a city he had lived in for 11 years, and that now felt like a city belonging to a version of himself that was ending. Nadine reached into her bag. She pulled out a small object wrapped in a paper napkin. She unwrapped it and set it on the table between them. A sprig of dried lavender, brown and brittle, the leaves curling inward. It did not look like much. It looked like something a person would throw away. Elijah looked at it. He breathed in. The scent was faint but specific, and when it reached him, it did not arrive through his nose. It arrived through a door in his body that opened directly into a room he had not been inside since he was 5 years old. A bedroom, night. A woman's hands smelling of lavender. The warmth of those hands on his forehead. The melody starting. The lights going off. The feeling of being held inside something safe. He breathed out. His eyes were wet. He did not wipe them. Nadine's phone buzzed. She looked at it. She answered and put it on speaker. Miss Lorraine's voice filled the small hotel room thin and clear, and carrying the specific authority of a woman who had spent 74 years choosing her words carefully. "Is that him?" Miss Lorraine said. "It is him," Nadine said. "Elijah," Miss Lorraine said. "My name is Lorraine Jessup. I have been sitting in your mother's kitchen every Saturday morning for 11 years eating cornbread and making phone calls. Your mother has been the bravest woman I have ever known. And I have known a lot of women." Her voice wavered on the last word, not from weakness, from the specific weight of something that had finally arrived after a very long time in transit. 11 years of Saturdays. 11 years of who are we calling today? All of it leading to this room, this phone call, this boy sitting in a hotel chair with wet eyes and a sprig of dried lavender on the table in front of him. Elijah said, "Thank you." Miss Lorraine said, "Do not thank me. Show up. That is all anyone can do. Show up and keep showing up." She hung up. The room was quiet. The lavender sat on the table between them. Nadine on the bed. Elijah in the chair. The distance was still 4 feet. But the space inside it had changed. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in November, Elijah walked up the stairs of an apartment building on Moreland Avenue in Atlanta and knocked on the door of Unit 312. Nadine opened it. She was wearing an apron. The apartment smelled like tomato soup. On the windowsill above the kitchen sink, a clay pot, lavender, new, green. She had bought it the day she signed the lease. It was the first thing she put in the apartment before the furniture, before the dishes, before the bed. The lavender came first, because the lavender had always come first. Elijah sat at the small kitchen table. He put his backpack on the floor and took out his sketchbook and opened it to a blank page. He picked up his charcoal. But this time he did not draw from memory. He looked up. His mother was standing at the stove stirring soup, and the light from the window was falling on the side of her face, and he drew what he saw. Not a reconstruction, not an approximation assembled from fragments and longing. The real thing. Present tense. She turned around. She saw the sketchbook open. She said, "What are you drawing?" He said, "Someone I finally found." She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the stove. She did not need to see the drawing. She did not need proof. She had spent 11 years holding a photograph until its edges blurred. She did not need to hold anything anymore. She could just stand in a kitchen and be seen. Outside Atlanta went on being Atlanta. Traffic on Moreland Avenue. A dog barking in the apartment below. The specific hum of a city in early evening winding down from the day not yet committed to the night. Life moving in its ordinary way. Indifferent to the specific miracle happening inside one apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that did not look remarkable from the outside. Some families are broken by the people inside them. Some families are found by the children who were told to stop looking. Before Elijah left that evening, Nadine did something she had not done in 11 years. She walked him to the door and she hummed. The melody. Their melody. She hummed it softly the way she used to hum it, when he was small and the world was a bedroom and a pair of hands, and a scent of lavender and the certainty that the voice above you would still be there when you opened your eyes. He was 16. He let her hum. He stood at the door with his backpack, and he let the melody reach him the way it had always reached him, through a channel deeper than hearing, and he closed his eyes for 2 seconds, and he was 5 and he was 16, and both of those things were true at the same time. On the windowsill of Nadine's old apartment in Philadelphia, the photograph of Elijah at 5 with the blurring edges now sat inside a frame. She had bought the frame at a dollar store the morning before she flew to Atlanta. It was plastic and plain, and it was the most important object she had ever purchased. The photograph did not need to be held anymore. It could rest. On a Saturday afternoon, Elijah returned to the Decatur Public Library. He walked to the bulletin board in the main hallway. The poster was still there, partially covered by a new flyer for a holiday craft fair. He reached up and unpinned it. He folded it, carefully, once, twice. He put it in his jacket pocket. It had done its job. They were not the family they would have been. 11 years had been taken and could not be returned. There would be difficult conversations ahead about Darnell, about forgiveness, about what to do with a father who was also the person who had stolen your childhood. There would be legal proceedings and therapy sessions and nights when the distance between them felt wider than 4 feet, and mornings when it felt like nothing at all. But they were the family they were choosing to become, one evening at a time, one song at a time, one drawing at a time. This story is fictional, but the reality it reflects is not. According to the United States Department of Justice, more than 200,000 children are victims of parental abduction each year in America. Many of them grow up believing one of their parents is dead. Many of the searching parents never find them. The legal system classifies most of these cases as civil disputes, not criminal ones, which means the resources available to searching parents are limited, and the consequences for abducting parents are often minimal or non-existent. I wrote this story because I believe there is a specific kind of cruelty in telling a child their parent is dead when they are not. It is not a lie about a fact. It is a lie about love. It says the person who loved you most no longer exists, and the child builds an entire identity on top of that absence. When the truth comes, it does not simply correct the record, it rebuilds the person. If you or someone you know is dealing with parental abduction, you can contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-84-356-78 or visit missingkids.org. Thank you for watching. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what do you think Elijah should do about his relationship with his father? Not what is right, what is real. See you in the next story.